least something to set something else. So, probably not enough, we'll see. I was raised properly. Whether I show it or not sometimes is two different things. I told somebody the other day, batteries, that my wife will take me anywhere probably twice. First time for the experience, and the second time to apologize. And that's the way it is. So I told Matt this morning I'm going to bring some stuff from TikTok and from Jelly Roll this morning, so we'll see how I work all that in. I will tell you this much. Today's sermon was inspired by Gygo. I had a football coach when I was in college. He talked about if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Talking about what you consume, watch, listen to, and all that stuff. He said, but if you put good in, you get good out. What you watch, consume, and listen to. And the irony here is, since it is the peak of political season, I can tell what people watch by what they regurgitate, what they say, and what they do. I can tell what you're watching, and that's just something I've been fortunate to, little trick you learn to see, You catch those key phrases because people don't realize it, that whatever they watch and they consume, they're programmed by. You're like, okay, Britt, where are you going for this? So this week I've been, thanks to Steve's sermon last week, and Steve and I having a good, 30, 40-minute nerd talk last week. We brought up some deep things and some things that we talked about and perspectives, and so I started, something he recommended, it was the CIA group has went through, it was this Andy Stanley's fundamental list. And so I'm about 3 or 4 episodes into that, so you'll probably get some Andy Stanley regurgitation today. On Tuesday I was in the car for about 6 hours, and so I did a lot of consuming, driving, and thinking. Did some note taking, and that's kind of where we came from today to start with that. And so I call this the dying church. The struggle is real. If we were to go around and look at the parking lots today in Hardin County, how many of them are as full as they used to be? How many people are going to church less and less? Is there anybody that feels like sometimes that church is an inconvenience? Or maybe you go because you feel guilty. If I don't go, somebody's going to miss me. Those are all things that play into it. And so I did a little research this morning about the real struggle. So who wants to guess which church group has the best attendance? Who has the highest percentage of attendance? No. And some of you, when I say this, you're going to be like, well, they're not even a real group. Mormons have the highest attendance percentage, followed by Protestants. Now, this third group you're really going to find, I may catch a little flack on this, but number 3, anybody want to guess? I say church, let's just say weekly meeting, we'll throw that in there. The Muslims. And rounding out number 4 are the Catholics. So let's just kind of analyze that for a little bit. Now, if you know anything about any of the other groups, you kind of understand that, with the Mormons, I've been in business in the network marketing industry for a long time, so I've made many Mormon friends because it's kind of hubbed in Salt Lake City and everything else like that. But they have precursory attendance. It's part of their fundamental belief structure. They want, and they're not getting too crazy into their beliefs. Their attendance is imperative for their afterlife, and it's also imperative that for their 10% each week that they give their banking and routing numbers, and the church deducts it each week off of their gross, not their net. There's some that argue that church attendance is a concept that came about in the really being a big deal as people have gotten more busy, because that was kind of how you keep the coffers full, because people give more when they're there. to go with it. And so why is the struggle, why are churches today struggling? Why is that struggle there? Some could say that we have our own struggles here too. But so what are some of the reasons they're struggling? And one of the things I have on this list is WIIFM, what's in it for me? I think as society has gotten much more into the, an egocentric or selfish perspective of things, so they say, hey, well, what do I get out of going? Right? That's there. There's other stuff to do. In fact, I have the top 10 list. Ooh, that was a bad. I might move that down a little bit or turn it down. Top 10 reasons why church attendance is on the way down. And so just some other stats to go with this. In 2007, 78% of people claimed to be Christian. That's down to 63% in 2020. You look at that, religious affiliation is down across the board. Only 47% routinely say they go to a church, synagogue, mosque, or a place of meeting. So here's some of the list here. Number one, affluence. As people become more affluent, meaning having means, wealth, and things like this, their desire or their need to go to church decreases. Because how many people when things are going good, it's the me show. It's because I did it. When things are going bad, it's because the devil did it. And then when things go bad, they like all that. Then they go back and they jump into things to get the blessing back. Think about that. They go back to church to get the blessing back. That might be part of the twist that goes with it. Number two, kids' activities. It's those darn softball teams and soccer teams and football teams and lacrosse and ballet. And the number two reason church attendance is down is because of kids' activities. I grew up in an area where you didn't do anything on Sunday and you could only go to Walmart 1 to 5. And, we used to make fun of those heathens in Murray because they played soccer on Sunday morning. That was 20 years ago, or actually 25 years ago, which was unheard of then, but they did it. Number three, blended families are a reason that church attendance is on the way down, because there are those hellfire and damnation preachers that get up there and they talk about all those immoral sins, and if it's a blended family and how they come together, they just don't want to go and hear the grief, so they separate themselves from it. Number four, I have a problem with number four, kinda. I'm not sure it's the right classification, but they say online attendance has driven down church attendance. Online options, they call it. I do like the fact that I can get on a message board or a chat group in WhatsApp. I can find a group of people that believe very similar to me. We can have philosophical, religious discussions. I can have support. I can have spiritual mentorship and never have to be in front of someone, and I can do it from the comfort of my couch in my workout clothes. I was going to say something else, but I caught. People are traveling more. Work and travel impact the weekends. I'll be perfectly honest with you. My life is so busy that there are Sunday mornings that I don't want to do anything except go be by myself somewhere. Whether in my living room, or whether on the golf course, or whether sitting at the lake, or sitting in my car somewhere. That it is literally beyond me to be able to come and people. Anybody else feel that way? I know Carla does. We have similar backgrounds. Number 6 I'm going to come back to, because I think it was pretty interesting. Number 7, self-directed spirituality. How many of y'all knew the guy that says, I can hunt on Sundays because that's my church and I can be with God that way? But there's also in the current Christian church, especially in the Southern Baptist, the Southern Belt, in the evangelical world, there's a massive deconstruction movement where people are actually deconstructing and deconverting at record numbers. They're leaving and saying, I don't need that noise, I don't need that mess, I don't need that jazz, I'm out. See ya. Number 8, what's in it for me? That selfish perspective. I want a church that does this, or I want that, I want this. Me. You think the choir's warming up or something. But I mean, that's exactly what it is. Attendance is on the way down because there are religious institutions that value attendance and place it on a higher pedestal than engagement and work. To use one of my famous network marketing quotes I've heard time and time again, meat in the seats puts green in the jeans. Sounds crazy, but it's true. They value the attendance, getting people there to get their money in order to do that. I'm not going to name a name of a church, but I know a local church that told some people that were sick and they were a little older, they needed to quit listening to their doctor, they needed to quit the medication, they quit those things and let God heal them. And at the same time, very shortly after, they had a meeting with that person, talked about their will, because when they pass away, they want to make sure the church gets their cut. That seems like a little bit of a conflict of interest to me. Hurry up and die so we get our stuff. Oh, there was a Bible story about that. The guy was a prodigal. Number 10, they say it's a cultural shift, meaning that it has become a fundamental idea that people are less interdependent than they have been before. They are more independent than they have been before. There are people that are okay with being by themselves. They're okay being alone. They're okay. They don't need to be a part of something because maybe they're different, because maybe they don't agree with, so it's just easier to isolate. And so there is a cultural shift that's taking place on that perspective, but also a further cultural shift is that, based on politics and based on a few things, there are groups that are religious groups that they're not cool to be associated with anymore because of the judgment and the persecution, and not persecution, the judgment and the assumption of guilt, presumed guilt, that you're like all those I hear about on TV. Getting into, sex scandals, politics, the hellfire and damnation, preaching. I mean, all that goes into it. People are at a point where they don't have time for that anymore. And we have gotten a little mentally, we are not nearly as tough as we used to be as a society, meaning that there's so many options and there's so much information, there's so much stuff going on that if I hear something I don't like, it's okay, I'll go somewhere and find something I do like. So if I'm sitting in church on Sunday and I don't like what I'm hearing, it's okay to quit and just fade out. That's completely acceptable. We're afraid of confrontation, so we get no resolutions, and it just spirals on and on. And so people it's not worth the hassle. And then number 6 is the reason that the majority of the time I've attended church for a large part of my adult life. But church attendance is down because of a cultural disappearance of guilt. There is less guilt in today's society. People do not handle guilt well. And people do not, people basically say, I'm not going to church because because they don't want to deal with the guilt of going. I have other things that I can do. But the church for a long time says the key to salvation and the keys to heaven are not what you do, it's being here on Sunday and hearing what we tell you. Being here on Sunday and writing the check. Being here on Sunday and holding the door. So there's been that shift away from people just culturally, there's, how many times have we seen stuff that's become much more culturally acceptable that if it was going on 10 years ago, people would have felt guilty about it. And so those are the 10 reasons, according to a Gallup poll, that church attendance is on the way down. And what if I tell you they're all wrong? Church attendance is on the way down because people have an innate ability today that they've never had before. They have access to information and they have the ability to find truth. And churches are dying today because they refuse to accept the truth. They refuse to accept that all these things in this list are charges. If they were in a court of law, they'd be being prosecuted for it. They refuse to accept the truth that the church is dying, not because of the evil world and all the knowledge that's out there. The church is dying because they are denying truth. They're dying because they're not embracing the fact that the way they have done things, what they've gotten involved in, the scandals, the publicity, the news, all of those negative things that we know, instead of facing them, owning them, accepting them, and trying to improve from them, the church is dying because they've denied it. They've said, no, that's not us. Or when someone brings up a point like that, they get voted out. They get pushed away because somebody's different. There's all these issues. I want you to think about the most negative church experiences that you've heard people have. Maybe you've had them. I want you to think about them. And that's why the church is dying. Oh, but hang on, Britton. Hang on. Whoa, hang on. The church has the ability to determine what's right and wrong. We are the moral authority. Louise, I'm not saying that. That's just saying that's the position that a lot of people take. The guy in the pulpit has the ability, based on how he feels, who he's influenced by, who he's listening to, what he wants to be a part of, he has the right to stand up there and tell you what's right and wrong. And so that leads me to an Andy Stanley point. We have a problem with the Bible. We're taught as children that this is God's holy word. It is infallible. It is never, how many of y'all ever heard that the Bible's infallible, the inspired word of God? How many of you heard that it's never changing? How many of you have ever heard somebody say that the Bible says it, that settles it, and that's enough for me? And that's all wrong. Barb must have had somebody had someone back there that really, we got a laugh out of the yourses back there. But that's where the church is wrong. I remember, I want to reference back to the sermon that I did last, that the church grew to 34 million and didn't have an official Bible. The Bible wasn't there. They weren't using the Old Testament because at that point in time, you got to remember, the Old Testament was only accepted by the Jews, and the Jews made up a very small portion. It started the Christian church, but it made up a very small portion of the end product when the Roman Empire accepted Christianity. There wasn't 34 million Jews in the world. From, the 1,000 that started were Jewish, and that's the community it started in, but it spread elsewhere, spread quickly. So we're taught that the Bible's God's holy word and it's the end-all be-all, but it wasn't, and it's not. That's a controversial point. I mean, if I were down there in Western Kentucky right now and I had the audacity to stand up in a church and tell them that red letter King James is not the way to go, I'd be rode out on a rail if they could find two people that could carry it, and then I might get tarred and feathered. Because how dare me question like that? But you see, that's what they've been taught. Man, when I was a kid, the most controversial thing that ever happened in the church that I grew up in was the pastor got up there one day, man, and he was bringing it. He was hitting everything he could with a hammer, man. I mean, he was hammering. I don't even remember what he was hammering. I think he was hammering some people in the church that were kind of speaking against him, that were kind of against something he had done. So we had a little power struggle. I'm like 10 years old, so there might be some circular memory here. But, I mean, they're hammering against it. And he pulls out and he does what a lot of good Bible people do. He cherry-picked a couple things. Cherry-picked a couple verses, proved his point, and then said, if we're not going to follow this book right here, then we might as well just throw it out the window. And he opened the window and he threw it in the yard. And you should have heard the collective gasp. Controversial. He's still there 30 years later. But I think sometimes as the church that we need to keep the proper perspective, that I think sometimes that we need to, it might not be bad just to, and focus on the important parts. We're taught as children, Andy Stanley point, we're taught as children that's God's holy word. It's all Bible stories, that it's all there. But guess what? It's not all created equal. Every one of you can give me a Bible story about one thing that comes from one place in the Bible and it was one perspective. There was one story about Noah and the ark. There's one story about King Solomon building the temple. There's one story about pick the Tower of Babel. I mean, we can go through all of them. Samson and Delilah. I mean, there's one story. All these stories from my kids. The coat of many colors. And then we get to the New Testament, and we get to the rest of the Bible. How many accounts are there of Jesus' ministry in the Bible, in the New Testament? There's 4. Jesus says that if you want to know how God is, you know me. That's a rough quote. I didn't run the scripture to get that exact. But there's a reason that's given there 4 times, and you can get into scholarly debate and everything about that. Well, one testament, one gospel is to one group of people, and one, that's fine. But it still doesn't change the fact it's in there 4 times. And it still doesn't change the fact that if you get into pre-canon, before they canonized, and you get into the Gospels and the Gnostics and all those other things out there, that there's hundreds of manuscripts, about 100, I think, manuscripts that didn't get in that still told the same story. But my point being is that the gospel, which is God's good news, it's his plan of reconciliation to close the gap that sin created between man and the Creator, is there 4 times. I'm not a mathematician, but if something is 4 times more important than something else, I think it has weight. If it's there 4 more times. If I get 4 more times of it, it must be important. And that's where why the churches are dying today, is because they've gotten away from that. They've gotten into a legalistic sense where they think that all Scripture is equal. And then they cherry pick what's important to them, and they go into Leviticus and they pull up a thing that says that if somebody wears mixed clothing, or they touch the skin of a dead pig, and they go through and all of the things that go with it, or if a man lies with a man, and they take out the context, they take out editing, they take all these things, but they weaponize it to brutalize people and to beat them into submission with sin and guilt for compliance. Now, how is that good news? That's not what Jesus called us to talk about. I get so frustrated with people because they fail to see their self-righteousness. And they think that I'm better than someone else because I don't do that. But in doing so, they break Christ's supreme law. That's why the church is failing. It's because, another network marketing quote is, they've gotten away from the recipe. They're not keeping the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is that Jesus lived a perfect life. And I'm okay if he wasn't perfect. That's up for debate. There's people that say that the virgin birth, so if you're Southern Baptist, you get trounced for this, that maybe the virgin birth was metaphorical. Fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter to me. Because ultimately, I'm a mess when it comes to my theology. I'm all over the place. I mean, it wouldn't take some of y'all, if we were to sit down and have an intense 30-minute conversation about it, you go, that guy's about one step of being off his rocker. Because I have simplified things for my mind to be able to comprehend. When you drive a lot and you think a lot and you listen to a lot and you consume a lot, it's easy to get lost in all the noise. And so I started at a very young age. I didn't know what it was then, but it was a deconstruction. Because I had problems with the way the Baptists did things, because I saw the hypocrisy. I had problems with the evangelical movement in seeing the grift of people that was there. And this is difficult because I'm 21, 22 years old and at a Baptist college. And then I get out of college, I go and I start working with kids and working in a youth program at a Baptist church. And my mother finally told me one day, she goes, if you have such a problem and get so mad going to church, maybe you should go somewhere else. And they left. Thankfully, that church left me. And that's how I found y'all. But when we get into what's Christ's supreme commandment? Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. And by the way, let's set some context for this scripture here. You ever notice in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were rolling around? It's like they had somebody that was with Jesus all the time just taking notes because they couldn't figure it out, so they were spying on it and watching it and being right in the middle of it. So they said, they come up here and they say, well, Hearing the crowd, he'd been preaching to a crowd. It says the marriage at the resurrection, and I don't know what the parable of the wedding banquet, and then you get into paying the imperial tax to Caesar, where he says, what is Caesar's, render unto Caesar's, and we get into another little parable, and then finally hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. In other words, he'd shut them up. He put them in their place publicly, humiliated them, probably hit their ego a little bit. Pretty sharp words. The Pharisees got together, now they were the opposing faction, and it had to do with the belief of life after death and what happened at death, and there were some other divisions in the Pharisees, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Pharisees were a much bigger sect, so the Sadducees were kind of like the fringe. The Pharisees got together, and they said, we're going to cook his goose this time, we're going to get him. They wanted a gotcha moment. They had somebody that was recording. They wanted to be able to run to the tabloids and said, Jesus said, and he's in contradiction of the law. Now we got him. The Pharisee got together, one of them an expert in the law, and tested him with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? It's frustrating when a very important scripture is it's half on one page and half on the other. Seems like they'd be able to put this thing together where it'd all be streamlined. And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. So this is it's not 1 and 2. It's 1A and 1B. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two things. Now, Andy goes into this a lot. He talks about it. And he gets in there. He gets in the real nitty-gritty here. Into that when he starts talking about there are people that are so litigious with the law in the Bible that they don't understand that is in there multiple times. Well, that little account is in there 4 times. And it takes precedent over the Old Testament. Anything that's in the Old Testament is trumped by that right there. Because we go down the 10 Commandments, which, that seems to be a political buzzword. We're putting the 10 Commandments back in school and doing all that, which I think's, yay, good, great. If you do that and you're not following those, all it does is amplify your hypocrisy. And that ain't good for anybody's witness. But we don't understand that trumps all of that. Jesus' life, his death, burial, and resurrection fulfilled that covenant, and it paid the debt that was created because of mankind's separation from God because of their sins, and the 10 Commandments and the 660 laws in the Torah that they went through, and they decided to simplify 10 by making it over 600, which somebody make mathematical sense of that. Because people need that, they need that fine letter, because if it says, I'm the kid, by the way, y'all have already figured this out, especially if you've been on the board with me the way I think. That, I'm the guy that if it doesn't say I can't, then it says I can. I live in a loophole. And that's what was going on, is they were using the scripture to justify bad behavior, to mistreat people and say, but hey, I'm upholding the law. They were living in loopholes. They weren't loving, they weren't serving, they weren't doing those things. And in Britt's mind, when I talk about the supreme Christian directive there, when I think about that, I don't like the word love, because we say love way too much. Now I'm not a scholar, but I've been through studies where they went through and they've gone to the Greek and they look at agape in Philadelphia and the 4 different types and things that are there. But love's not what I'm talking about. I like to take that word love and replace it with a word that really makes you uncomfortable. Because if you take the word love out and change it with a simple word like, say, serve, that changes things. Because then it takes it from a concept or an idea to an action. And that is where it gets uncomfortable. And that is where the church has failed, the collective. Because they have gotten wrapped up in ideas and concepts and philosophies and statements and have gotten away from the action of what we have been called to do. The church has complicated the world that we live in because of what's right and what's wrong, moral, immoral, good, evil, which none of that matters. Now that's really a crazy concept, that none of those things matter, because if you're doing what we're called to do, everything else takes care of itself. It's all gone. All the controversy. Now, I can tie into the parable of the sower here and tell you that if you live that way, you will have more sorrow than joy. Because we know from the parable of the sower that Jesus told, I think a little bit later down the line, I don't remember the chronology of it, but the parable of the sower says that the farmer was sowing his seed and it fell on the good ground, and it fell on the rocks and the thorns, and the birds ate it, and all the things that happened. But only 1 out of 4 was successful. So that means you're going to have heartache and heartburn. That's where Christianity's hard. If we're doing the serving, the loving, and the messy stuff, it's hard. That's where the church is failing. They're not doing the hard things. They're saying, oh, I'm having a hard conversation with Kevin because I'm going to tell him having long hair is wrong. David's in that boat with you too. I am too. That's why I threw that rock, because my wife's on me all over about my wife is on me about my hair. My mom is too. My one rule is I won't let it get long enough I can put it in a ponytail, though. That's my limit. But the church has missed the ball. It has missed the call. It has missed the mission. And that's why the church is failing. We're fighting and hanging on. And we've got people that are in this church that work hard, and they do a lot of things. And it feels like if we add anything else to the plate, then it's just going to be the same people doing the same things. And I'm going to say, so what? Because that's the call. Personally, I've had a lot of struggles in the last 6 months. Very few of you know anything about it because we haven't talked about it. I like to, one of my favorite musical guys is Jelly Roll. One of his real popular songs right now is I'm Not Okay. The first verse is, let me see if I get this to pull up here. It says, I'm not okay, I'm barely getting by, I'm losing track of days and losing sleep at night. I'm not okay, I'm hanging on the rails. So if I say I'm fine, just know I've learned to hide it well. How many of y'all does that apply to? Every day. I've had, not spiritual conflict, but I've had spiritual issues about my belief structure, about what I'm supposed to do. I've had issues with people, job issues, change. And I know there's people that say, man, they probably think I look like I hold it together. I know I look like a rolling dumpster fire most days, but at least I'm holding it together and I'm rolling. But it's there. That's where we're at. And the arrogance of the situation is a lot of times when people say that that's what's going on, they forget that everybody else has as much or more going on for them. That's where the church has missed the thing. There's no good news in the modern church. Very, very little good news in the modern church. How many of you have flipped on the television and you watch something politically conservative and you hear about the evangelical movement and they're telling you what they're against and what they're condemning and talking about the evils of this and God's punishing people for that? And and it's there. Is there any wonder? Who wants to be a part of that? Is there any wonder that the church numbers are in decline? Why? There's no good news. This is pointed, guys. It's not easy. It's ugly, and I may make somebody mad, and I'm sorry if that's the case. I'll sign over the check you're giving me at the end of the week for doing this. But when we figure some things out and we get our alignment correct and we are aligned with Jesus' ultimate commandment. The term I learned for this, and I found out that I have been one of these for a long time and didn't know it, had that light bulb go off, is I'm a red letter Christian. And that means, and I don't think that, I can't even tell you, I don't think this Bible I'm using is a red letter Bible. Let me see. It is not. But I'm a red letter Christian. And I'm not going to discount all other scripture. But if it was not what Jesus said and how Jesus addressed the situation and about what Jesus did, you're going to have a hard time giving it much weight for me. I mean, my good old Southern Baptist brothers and sisters in Western Kentucky, I think they hold Paul in the same esteem as Jesus. Never mind the fact they forget that Paul was writing letters to people that he knew, that he had been with, that he had served with, and there were specific contexts about. But they think that's universal application, and I don't see it that way. And I for sure as heck don't see that it trumps what Jesus said. And so that's a whole new way. The good news is that Jesus said, if you want to know the Father, then know me. Do what I've told you to do, live how I've told you to live, but most importantly, serve those I've told you to serve, and that is your neighbor. Now, I've been a mess the last 6 months. It's actually, let's be perfectly honest. I've been a mess about the last 45 years. It's been a little worse the last 6 to 12 months. I mean, lots of issues, lots of things to deal with, lots of guilt, lots of frustration that's there. But I said I'm okay because I hold it together and I try to hide it well. Because I know that there's people that have it worse than me, and I know that there's people that need me to do what I can do and not complain and just know that eventually it's going to be okay. You know, what was it David always says? You're either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or going into a storm. But there's always a storm. That's life. So, today, I have a little challenge. And I know that there's people that are doing as much as you possibly can, but I want to challenge you to do more. That includes me. I'm talking to me, not anybody specifically. But Carla and several of us put this statement, Angel, and I think Rita was in there, growing our faith and congregation through outreach and service. Ideas. So you hear something on this list that sounds good to you, let me know. I'll be more intentional and make the time to do it. But helping families in need. These were from this is actually from the survey of the church. Online ministry, family-focused ministry, supporting those who feel unwanted and loved, Bible studies, ministry in alienated groups that are hurt by the church, ministry for seniors, mentoring youth, ministry for single parents, focus on the homeless. Those are all things that people in the church said that we need to be doing. We're doing some of it, but those are all opportunities. We have opportunities every single day to serve. It's often thankless. So I told you I've been a mess. I've had a lot. I've got some ideas here. If let's talk about it. Talk to me, Louise, Carla. We'll figure something out. This last week's been really hard. Y'all know back in April I took a job. The first time I've worked for somebody since 2011. I've gotten to be very close with the guy that owned the company. We've gotten to be very good friends. And a couple of weeks ago, he calls and says, hey, I've got to make a trip over to this place. He's like, can you meet me? I want you to ride with me. So I said yes. And we went, and he tells me that, I have made a big part of my life learning this industry, learning those people, learning how to serve, learning how to do the things that I need to do. And he tells me that he sold the company. Come to find out, that is the glamorous version of what happened. It was not of his choosing, but it was done, and it happened. And so now here I am with a massive plate of uncertainty. Find out my new boss is 27 years old. He's doing pretty good. I've been impressed so far. But I have that. We've had a horrible time at the Red Brick. I mean, just the economy and retail has been difficult. I think we're going to make it. There have been problems in my family, health issues, all those things. And I feel like in my world, I don't say much about a lot of things if I can't say something positive, because there are so many people that depend on me. And that's my plate. I've always thought I'm more mentally tough than most people. We know I'm more hard-headed than most people. Whether that equates or not, I don't know. But I told Georgia's mom, she and I were having a candid conversation after all her health issues and everything else like that. And I told her, I said, I think I'm tougher than most people. And I said, and I have heard a lot of people say they can't go on, that they're struggling, that they're fighting depression, they're fighting these things. And I've kind of looked at it, and I'm sympathetic about it, but I'm not, I don't sympathize to the point of action. It's just one of those things. I understand and I feel bad for them, but a lot of times I think in my back of my mind, I'll be like, they just need to toughen up a little bit. Not a popular point of position, but when you were raised how I was raised, being an athlete, doing those things, the older guys especially know how I feel, understand the sentiment that I say that, if it's bad, buckle down, push through it, it'll get better. And for the first time in a long, ever, I told April, I said, Michelle and I had this conversation already too, but it was, you're supposed to have that conversation with your spouse. But it was the first time I'd verbalized it to a friend. I said, for the first time in my life, I actually kind of understand what being overwhelmed is like. And I wasn't at that point where I was like, I wasn't suicidal. I was very frustrated. And I was at that point where I understood. So, how many of y'all saying, well, Britt, where are you going with this? You're rambling and you're over. So last week, I got a Facebook message. Now, most of y'all know Jay Stubbs. Jay and I are close friends. I don't go see him nearly as much as I should. He's pretty homebound with his health issues. He's got a car issue right now, and so all that's kind of adding up. And I have all this going on, and guess what happens? I get something else put on my plate. Jay's caregiver's out of town for the next week, and he needs somebody to come over and get him up, help get his food ready, and do those things. And I'm his first call. Anytime that he has a fall, he gets stuck, he gets a situation, Michelle and I are who he calls. We're the closest. We take care of that. I don't say that, I'm not wanting accolades or anything, that's just the reality of it. So he calls and he says, hey, my caregiver's out of town. What do you got going on this week? And I'm like, oh boy. So I said, yeah, I'll take care of it, because that's what I do. I just get stuff done. So I said all of that to say this, that in the last 2 days, I have gotten more perspective. I have gotten more understanding. I've gotten more clarity by choosing to serve someone and choosing to be able to help someone, and to do that additional. And it turned the corner. So I say all of that to say this, that the key to the problems, that the key to the issues that the church is facing is to go back and look at how they did it in the beginning. Throughout history, Christians have always been the greatest servers of all time. When the plague was going on, who was taking care of the sick and risking their health to care for the dead and the dying? It was the church members. It was the nuns. It was the congregants, people that were doing that. Anytime, at any point in time in history, when there's been tragedy, crisis, things like that, up until maybe now, Christians have led the charge to serve those that had nobody to fight for them, to advocate for them, to be there for them. And now the modern church has gotten to that point where we're so worried about our litigious being right versus being moral versus being wrong that the church is failing because it is not serving all that it is called to serve. So, in closing, if things aren't going well, put more on your plate. Find that opportunity to serve. And here's the thing too. If we need more people in the building so we can serve more people and be bigger and better, servers and providers for our community, I challenge you to start with the people that you know that are having the issues, that are having hard times. Be a better friend and say, hey, come meet some of my other friends, and ask them to come with you. Because that's how the church grows. I won't get into my political discourse about how the church lost its power in the 30s and 40s when welfare programs got started, and the church lost its influence because when people were having a hard time, they used to turn to the church, and now they turn to the government. Won't get into a whole lot of that, but it's there. The church has been its biggest and its best when it's called to take care of those that are the least, and then when they do so. And we have a lot of people that are the marginalized. We have a lot of people that are there right now that need somebody. And we're, as Christians, not doing a good job of extending the invitation and just being there and being available and not worrying about me, letting our ego die and what I got to worry about, and do that. So that's the challenge. And I know, this is the last thing I'll say, I know there are some of you in this room that you have the challenges that you have. And if we can help, tell us. If you need to talk. Call me. Call Louise. Call Carla. Mike's a good listener. Jerry, not so much. He has a hard time. Jerry, you're not a good listener. But we have, I don't remember the scripture. It says the harvest is ready, the harvest is nigh, and the fields are heavy, or fields are ripe, or overflowing, or whatever it is. But the workers are few, because the workers have decreased because they've gotten wrapped up in their self. They've gotten wrapped up in right versus what they think is right versus wrong, using Christ's Christ's righteousness that we have because we're forgiven and we've been saved. That righteousness is borrowed. If he were to rescind that contract, we would be just like everybody else. So with that in mind, extend. Find somebody this week that you can extend that hand of friendship to. Listen, serve, do what you can. If it's more than you can handle, call somebody. Because that's the true strength of being in a congregation, is that we can shoulder the burden with each other. Let us close in prayer. Matt, do we have a song? It doesn't matter. Go ahead and play the song. If you have a need, guys, we'll do the best we can to handle it. If you need to talk to somebody, you need to share something, just let us know.